Hello. Our story begins inside the Kamino facilities at Tapoka City with a meditative Jedi. Shaak Ti, by order of the High Council, presided over these training halls to assist with the development and release of all clone troopers. She, every morning, found herself on a perch that overlooked one of the many combat exercises. Shaak Ti typically arrived 3 hours before the first sessions started around the interior of the massive dome. She held her eyes shut without struggle and thought deeply through the Force. The encircling cloud of darkness in the galaxy hovered over her. It didn't always bog her down, but today it felt especially unbearable. The weight of the war and the dark side, and of course, the needless loss of life hurt her heart in ways she didn't think were possible. Like any Jedi, she had experienced loss, but none to this level concurrently. It was difficult for her as well, because many of these clones looked to her for guidance. Fives and the late clone trooper Echo were ones that came to her for advice. Many others sought clarity, and she frequently gave that. It was her mandate as a Jedi Master and Jedi General to be what no one else inside Tapoka City could be. One other example was a clone referred to as Sister. Shaak Ti even helped and guided the rejected clones, those that, like 99, couldn't operate on battlefields. It didn't matter to Shaak Ti. Every being was worthy of time, compassion, empathy, and understanding. She, in the most Jedi way appropriate, loved all who visited her and all who passed by her. This particular day, she could tell, wouldn't be one of her more open days. She woke up with a raging headache that stretched all the way down her leku. Her attempts to use meditation to mend such pains wasn't working, and after 2 hours of silence without resolve, she impatiently pulled her eyes open and stood up. She walked over to the edge of the railing and looked down. Battle droids had already been stationed for the next wave of cadets, ready for the morning exercises. As she looked down over the railing, she could see the chief medical scientist, Nala Se, scolding one of the reject clones. He was a bit of a hunchback, similar to 99, and he was struggling. It seemed today wasn't everyone's day, but because no one else could see her, or at least she thought no one could, Nala Se backhanded the reject clone with such force he fell over. The battle droid he was moving into position landed on top of him, and he winced, pulling his ankle back and holding it. Shaak Ti on any other day may have been more patient, but not today. She pulled her hands on the railing and launched herself off the balcony and slammed down before the scientist. Nala Se backed up, perplexed that anyone had seen her actions. Shaak Ti raised an eyebrow of disgust at the Kaminoan, before leaning over and helping the clone named 99.183 off the ground. It had become an inside joke for the reject clones to name themselves after 99, so they all took a decimal point with numbers they liked or related to their own CT numbers to remember their brother by. Shaak Ti called the clone by the name he chose, and a smile formed on his growingly red cheek. She asked if he was alright, and the trooper stood as tall as he could and nodded with pride, thanking her. He knew Shaak Ti would have his back, and she would prove that when he limped away from the two of them. The Jedi Master scolded Nala Se for her ridiculous behavior. They were children. They shouldn't be treated like animals. The scientist shot back that the Jedi sent those same children to die for them in the war. Oh, that hit the right button, because Shaak Ti stepped towards Nala Se and reminded her that they were the scientists. It was entirely within their power to change that. Truthfully, there was a science behind it, and Shaak Ti didn't need to know that, but she wasn't about to let this criminally inhuman doctor of death get away with being so neglecting of her own creations. Nala Se made a snide remark about the Jedi and their ridiculous sense of pride. Shaak Ti took a deep breath and told the doctor that their position here on Kamino was to help those learning. Those who didn't have the capabilities to move to battlefronts should be treated with dignity, as 99 proved during the Battle of Kamino, and as any other dysfunctional clone would, that they were just as capable soldiers in their hearts and souls as any other trooper. Nala Se leaned in and told Shaak Ti to send .183 to the battlefront and see how long he lasts then. There was a reason the two of them rarely spoke. They could rage bait the other into losing their minds, but that was the irony too. Nala Se couldn't do anything about the Jedi presence on Kamino, and the Republic needed the brains of the chief medical scientist. More Palpatine than Republic, but no one needed to know that. Their faces stood mere inches apart. and Shaak Ti told the lengthy alien creature that she rarely appreciated what the clones were, and they deserved to be treated as anyone else would. Nala steadied her shoulders and expressed that these clones were just as expendable as Jedi in her eyes. It didn't matter if they came from test tubes or grew up inside a palace on Coruscant. The day would come when all of them were gone, and for that day, Nala Se wished that Shaak Ti's permanence be dealt with humanely, so that she could at the very least feel that all of her courageous acts of honor were justified. Nala Se hissed and turned away, storming out of the chambers. Shaak Ti replayed the message in her head a dozen times before turning back to see if 99.183 was doing alright. He was. He set the droid up in his marked position and was leaving the arena as she turned around. The Jedi General pursed her lips and abandoned the chambers before the training regiments could begin. As Shaak Ti found herself at her own quarters, she couldn't help but dwell on Nala Se's words. Neither enjoyed arguing. Nala Se believed it was wasteful. Science was much more worth her time. Shaak Ti, of course, loathed it because there were more effective methods of communication. But she really struck a nerve today. Nala Se wasn't having it with Shaak Ti, and what she said was very ominous. It wasn't phrased as a threat, but it felt like one. Of course, the Jedi Master didn't fear the Kaminoan. It would be incredibly difficult for anyone to sneak up on her and hurt her or even kill her. But the threat itself didn't feel like something Nala Se would participate in. It was sheepish, as if forces more capable than she would be capable of taking down a Jedi Master or all of them. Shaak Ti reasonably tried to forget about it, because it was such a weird statement. It was vague and mildly concerning. Again, she didn't fear Nala Se, but it made her suspicious. While conducting drills and instructing cadets, it sat in her mind. Even when helping out the Kaminoan staff with flight simulations and turbo cannon tests. It was bizarre, and eventually by the end of the day, she had enough of this. Shaak Ti would write down the words verbatim inside of her journal and sleep on it. Maybe it wasn't the brightest idea, but there was no reason in her mind to believe that she was in any imminent danger. When the morning came, she did as she always did. She went to her perch to meditate for 2 to 3 hours. Initially, the thought didn't even cross her mind. Shaak Ti wasn't necessarily a morning person anyways, but if the thought was that important, then surely it would surge into her mind the second she woke up, and it didn't, until she had a vision. This wasn't quite an Order 66 vision, but it was Nala Se injecting the clone specimens inside their incubators with chips. Shaak Ti continued watching as the Kaminoan scientist started speaking to the children with violence on her lips. The words weren't audible. This continued, with other tests being orchestrated, and eventually, Shaak Ti saw a regular, able-bodied clone given a vocal command and the life in their eyes vanished. At that, Shaak Ti exited the vision and placed her hand over her heart and felt the pulsating beat, before it slowed down and she prepared to contact the Jedi Temple. Due to the timing of things, it was the middle of the night on Coruscant, and none of the counselors would be available until later in the day. She, worried about this and its potential implications, informed the council of her vision. This, in her mind, was not a past, present, or future vision. It was simply her seeing the will of the Force. There was absolutely no reason in her mind to believe this happened or would happen. It simply felt like a warning from the Force. The council would receive a calm and collected message from their Jedi General on Kamino. Shaak Ti would also follow through with an adjacent journal entry to mark this moment. Later in the afternoon, during a separate meditation she used during her designated lunch breaks, she was contacted by the High Council. Masters Windu, Plo, and Saesee were usually the 3 early risers from the council. Mace was restless, especially during the war. Plo slept little, and Saesee just liked to be early. They would also be accompanied by Obi-Wan as they started their call. They requested for more thoughts from Shaak Ti. This was a display of the active council at work with assisting individuals who asked them directly for assistance. It went a long way to communicate. Shaak Ti was concise with her words and delicate with her descriptions of the vision. She didn't want to overstep too much because it could appear that she was emotionally attached to the visions, which she wasn't. Mace was the first to say anything in response, and after she spoke, he asked her what she wanted to do about it, before adding another question moments before she spoke, and he asked, what she would be comfortable doing to deal with it. The two sentences lingered in the air for a moment, as the other members quietly watched her. Shaak Ti didn't flex a muscle on her face. She blankly looked at the hologram before telling them that she wanted to protect the clones, the Jedi Order, and the Republic. That was her duty here, and she would fulfill it. Mace nodded his head, and she continued telling them that she would begin her own search into the Kaminoan cloning. A question was floated by Master Kenobi, asking if she wanted assistance, but she declined. If it would come from a Jedi, it'd be too suspicious. She started speaking through her idea and what she planned on executing. Just as she was wrapping up, Master Plo raised a finger from his chair, and they all looked at him. Plo reminded them that Commander Thorn of the Coruscant Guard was a firm Jedi supporter. He had clearance to go anywhere he wanted because he was a shock trooper. If she needed, the Jedi could dispatch him and his squad to assist her. Shaak Ti actually liked the idea quite a bit, because Thorn wouldn't be needed for the actual investigation but as a diversion. The 5 Jedi scaled a plan and began acting on it almost immediately after finishing their discussion. Before Commander Thorn could ever depart for Kamino with his shock troopers, Shaak Ti was getting to work. Per the Kaminoan government, she was given quote-unquote full access to their facilities, so seeing her in their archives wasn't exactly uncommon. She had correctly suspected that they watched her every move in their archives, so she wouldn't have any success utilizing the archives without drawing suspicion if she was looking for something specific. However, that didn't stop her from using the archives on the weekly, as she had since her arrival. As she had told Prime Minister Lama Su, Shaak Ti craved information. She was a learner, and it was very important for her to best understand cultures and customs, especially during her stay. It made her a better Jedi and also a more understanding individual and sentient. Her time in the archives before Thorn's arrival consisted of searching through cadet formation. It wasn't super close to what she was looking for, but it also wouldn't draw any attention from those who monitored her search history. While it didn't directly tell her anything, it was a step in the right direction. It meant that she needed to start her search younger than typical aged cadets. At the end of the week, her Jedi sent backup would arrive, and she'd speak with Thorn for a solid 40 minutes on her perch in the training hall. He understood to a degree why he was here. She told him everything that she was willing to share, and it made perfect sense to him. The mission wasn't as bland as spying on the Kaminoans or learning about something from a mystical vision. It was described that Nala Se had been mistreating the clones, especially the 99-type dysfunctional clones. Thorn loved all of his brothers, as most clones did, and he sided with the Jedi because, in all fairness, these chips that she saw were theoretically progressing the abuse the Kaminoans could use against the army. So it wasn't the biggest deal ever in his eyes. He would also explain that to the rest of his squad. Thorn indicated that his group would be giving her a technician as they walked through routine exercises for her diversion. It wasn't common for shock troopers to be on Tipoca City, so they had to make a show out of their presence. The first day of their arrival was short because they landed at dusk, so preparations were made and Thorn's boys got their rest. When the morning came, they got to work. They started with shutting down the command center and replacing all Kaminoan operatives with shock troopers and clearing out the archives, scientific labs, schools, and governmental offices. The Kaminoans were gathered in their bunkers for what was believed to be a test run for a potential second battle of Kamino. It gave the clones stationed on Kamino a distraction and allowed Shaak Ti more than 3 hours of operation unbothered inside the archives. She and the technician walked through the plan the previous night. It also really helped that this specific clone needed her guidance when he was a cadet. He trusted her with his life, and was willing to repay a favor for all she helped him with. Their search was frustrating to begin with. They both used separate terminals and rolled through pages of information. Thanks to the command station controlled by Thorn, he was able to release passwords and codes to further their investigation. As the minutes rolled past their first hour, there was a sense of tension. They worried that maybe Shaak Ti had done all of this for nothing, potentially harming the relationship between the Order and the clone army. But that very quickly changed for them. The Jedi Master scrolled past a file from the early days of the clone army, an experimental device implanted in the clones that had intensified accelerated cloning. Essentially, to ensure the army would work, the Kaminoans developed clones that could reach full physical maturity in the span of months. None of these clones were designed to survive long term. But that was the perfect test to see if the inhibitor chips were feasible or not on the fully developed body. The early tests, run by Nala Se, were strictly experimental, a protective tool to ensure they could control clones and that their ally, Tyrannus, could order the clone army to do anything they wanted. Shaak Ti watched paragraphs fly by her eyes as she told the technician behind her what he needed to search for with a mumble in her voice. Shaak Ti didn't know if she could believe what she was reading, but the minutes started to go by and every word became more frighteningly real. With access codes and passwords, she was able to see holograms of Nala Se, where she spoke extensively on how to manipulate this cloning in situations that she might not be alive in the future. The purpose of the Kaminoan archives was to store information so that future generations of cloners could be more successful and profitable. Nala Se was making breakthroughs that no other scientist at Tapoka City had done in their history. Shaak Ti was disgusted by the sheer lack of humanity. This scientist was pushing the limits of the sentient body, and even more importantly, the mind. The inhibitor chips were quickly viewed by the technician behind her, and Shaak Ti felt the worry that crossed his body before he could even say a word to her. She turned back and saw the clone clench his fist and frustratedly scroll through the pages. Shaak Ti called out his name and asked what he discovered, and he responded, which forced her to walk over and see for herself, with her own eyes. The list. Everything inside the inhibitor chips were present for her to see. The two of them were somewhere between furious and terrified. The Kaminoans, or anyone who had access to these orders, could completely uproot the Grand Army of the Republic. A single individual could turn an entire military of sentient, free-thinking soldiers into killing machines that acted on order, just like battle droids did. The Jedi Master plugged a drive into the terminal and took everything she could so that it could be hand-delivered to the Jedi Council by Commander Thorn. She was putting a lot of trust into him by doing this, but he would do it without hesitation. The thought of telling the Chancellor didn't cross his mind, honestly, because he believed the Jedi Council would naturally pass this information to him. But that wouldn't happen. Shaak Ti would remain greatly disturbed for a few days, without having contacted the Council. She also wouldn't be contacted about the Council regarding the information they received from her. It would be a really weird situation, actually. Anakin was present by happenstance, describing something about the beginning of the Outer Rim sieges, and Commander Thorn entered the chambers. Clones didn't frequent the temple a lot, so it was really weird to Anakin. The clone commander turned on a hologram and spoke extensively for about an hour. Even though Shaak Ti and the technician found everything about an hour into their hunt, they continued prying everything they could out of the archives, before covering it up that anyone was in there. To the Kaminoans, nothing looked any different, or even seen. So it was a clear operation from the clones and from Shaak Ti. The Council had very ranging reactions to this information, and Thorn left the disc with everything on it in Master Windu's hands, before abandoning the Council chambers. There was a sense of dread within the room. Everyone looked to each other, trying to figure out if there might be some sort of direction to go off of. Master Fisto suggested immediate action. Even though the Kaminoans didn't show signs of treachery, they couldn't be trusted with that kind of power. This prompted Plo to ponder who deserved that kind of control. Yoda didn't disagree with either sentiment, but it wasn't a matter of deserving, but who had the honor to wield it. Master Mundi suggested an all-out takeover of Kamino. The Jedi Order needed to be in control of those orders. Depa Billaba didn't believe a hostile attack would be appreciated by the Senate, even though she and many others agree with the direction. Mace firmed his back and told them all that the Senate did not need to know. He tossed the device in his hands and told all of them that no one should know. However, he confessed his own worries. The Jedi should take over Tapoka City and the Kaminoans, but there could be information that they didn't want to learn if they did that. The counselors by this point had also kind of forgotten that Anakin was present for this, and so he just listened with confusion, but also eager ears. Anakin then reminded them of his presence when he asked what they could also possibly learn by taking over Kamino. Mace leaned back and spoke of Tyrannus. Kenobi followed this up, reminding Anakin of the individual that assisted Sifo Dyas with the creation of the clone army. If Tyrannus was a Sith Lord, then the clones were a tool to destroy the Order and take over the Republic. Not to jump to conclusions, but that was a worst-case scenario. The Jedi suggested rush action. They needed to deal with this immediately. It wasn't their way, but Yoda concluded that it needed to be done to ensure the protection of the Jedi Order and the galaxy as a whole. Master Plo and Windu rose to their feet. Plo waved Anakin along and walked with him out of the chambers. This was shortly after Ahsoka's departure and before the Tup incidents, so the Jedi were completely in the blind until this information returned from Kamino, sent by Shaak Ti. Following Windu would be another few selected counselors, including Kenobi, Fisto, Eth Koth, and Yoda. A task force would be assembled before the end of the next hour, and they would depart for Kamino immediately. The force of Jedi came with Commander Thorn, who believed this was a mission requested by the Chancellor. Not that it really mattered who ordered it, but he was serving to benefit his brothers. The Jedi were stopping the Kaminoans from forcing their control over the Grand Army. This was honorable in his eyes. The light cruiser that brought the Jedi task force to Kamino docked on the dome of Taboka City, and quietly, the Jedi and clone force slipped into the city, arresting and capturing officials of all sorts, all Kaminoan. Regular personnel and staff were the first to be swept out by this wave of Jedi moving through the facility. Commander Thorn was present to assert control over the clones inside the city, essentially protecting the Jedi from being seen as a hostile force. There were over 150 Jedi on Kamino. This was the largest gathering of knights and masters since Geonosis. It was a massive force, and Skywalker stuck to the sides of Windu and Plo. There wasn't any conflict. Definitely some confused cadets and troopers, but no actual hostility. Commander Thorn's presence was exactly what the Jedi needed to work through the ranks of the Kaminoans with ease. Mace's amethyst saber would lead the Jedi into political offices of the city, and he, with Plo and Anakin, would capture Lama Su, Nala Se, and Kaminoan Senator Holly Paterni. Without a single injury, death, or blaster fired, Kamino fell into Jedi control immediately, and Skywalker would accompany the minds of the Council as they interrogated the Kaminoan leadership. Shaak Ti was not at all informed of this attack, but she did assist her brothers and sisters until everything returned to calmness. She, of course, would be with the Council for the interrogation, because she had seen the evidence to prove the Kaminoans were hiding information. Initially, Lama Su and Nala Se protected their secret ally, because there was nothing the Jedi needed to know about their orders. They were confidential, not meant to be seen, and also just in case of emergency. The Jedi were seeking information, and the Kaminoans used scientific answers, like the inhibitor chips were installed to mediate emotions and make the clones more dormant. But that clearly wasn't the truth. Eventually, as they did with Cad Bane, Anakin, Mace, Obi-Wan, and Yoda would mind-trick the stubborn minds of the important captives to deliver information to them. It was very hard on the mind, but that was within their control. The Kaminoans didn't want to speak, and now they had to. They were forced to, and it just didn't need to be that difficult. But as a result of the mind-tricking and the very forceful use of the Force itself, the Jedi learned very damning information that put the collective present council into a state of pure confusion. Commander Thorn heard the information too, despite not participating in the mind trick itself. As they collectively learned, Tyrannus was secretly Count Dooku, and he was working with an important Republic official. The Kaminoans legitimately did not know who, but that individual's name was Lord Sidious. This was pretty much confirming everything the Jedi feared, though worst case scenario just happened to be true. Their theories were seen as originally outlandish and far-fetched, but they were so wrong. They had wasted 2.5 years fighting a war no one would win, and for nothing. It was here where the Jedi lost Anakin. They would essentially threaten to take control over the Republic. Commander Thorn didn't agree with the notion personally, but he was suggesting utilizing Order 30, which essentially included the mass capture and removal of all Republic government leadership, without killing them. Thorn did see this idea as potentially threatening to the clones, as they would be seen as the villains in all of this, but he also believed that it could help the Jedi expose the major threat that sat at the heart of the government. Anakin overwhelmingly rejected the idea of capturing every single senator and Republic official, and he thought the other Jedi would have too, but he stood alone in this. The Council didn't want to impose this executive order without the permission of another clone, but Commander Thorn would be taking complete command over the army in that sector to do this. This also wasn't a totally selfish move for control on his part, but as he acted with Shaak Ti and with the 150 Jedi here, he was doing all of this for the betterment and protection of his clone brothers. If there was a quote-unquote maniac in the Senate that had the power to turn the clones against each other, the Jedi, or local populations, he couldn't and wouldn't forgive himself for not acting to stop it. This was the major difference between Fox and Thorn. Thorn was absolutely willing to take the blame and the heat for calling the Order on Coruscant, and assuming total leadership over the Coruscant Guard, and any other units that they might need for this mission. Thorn and the Jedi Council were in almost complete agreement over the capture of the Republic Senate. Because of Padme's position within the Senate, Skywalker disagreed, and he forcefully told the counselors in particular that they had gone too far, but the Jedi weren't really willing to sacrifice the Republic or the galaxy because of him. Dooku had control over the clone armies, and could change everything within an instant. Someone inside the Senate had the exact same control. Stopping the Senate was within their power. As far as they knew and learned from their interrogation, Dooku didn't have access to the clone communication frequency. Their best bet was to try and find the Sith Lord who operated inside the Senate and capture them, so that they could defeat Dooku eventually. It shouldn't theoretically include the Jedi becoming the Republic government, but if it did, then they would do what they needed to. They also were going to remove all inhibitor chips on Kamino, just in case. Skywalker, again, trying to protect Padme's best interests, slowly became more and more aggravated, until Plo Koon and Shaak Ti had to step in and force him from their discussions. They all understood that it wasn't the best public look, but if Thorn was so willing to be of an assistance, then they couldn't pass up the offer. Anakin frustratedly tried to stop them, and told Shaak Ti and Plo that they were in the wrong for targeting the Senate, but they literally had no other choice. This was a threat against the Republic as a whole. If they didn't take it as seriously as they were, then everyone they cared about could be in jeopardy. Didn't he want to stop Dooku and the Separatists? He shook their hands off of his arms and told them that it was the only thing they should be doing, not going after the Senate but Dooku. The Jedi instead took him to a light corvette, not the same vessel the Jedi arrived in, and told him that he was being kept away from Coruscant until further notice. This wasn't their given orders, but a decision the two masters decided was necessary in the moment. To Anakin, some of this looked like power hunger. Obviously, he was present for everything, but two of his best friends were inside the Republic. He personally could not betray them, especially not his secret wife. The Jedi knew about the friendships and didn't have any intention to hurt anyone that wasn't aligned with the Sith. But because he refused to listen, he was put into a vessel and departed with orders to stay afloat. No stopping. Anakin was very frustrated, and before he could get to an escape pod, the ship jumped to hyperspace. They grounded him. Inversely, the Council gathered up their own leadership and, with Commander Thorn, designated control over Tipoca City to a trusted clone and Jedi leadership. Every single Kaminoan would be rounded up and brought to the Jedi Temple to ensure their oversight and protection. Order 30 would be executed by Commander Thorn in a controlled environment. On their return to Coruscant, only the shock troopers of the Coruscant Guard would receive that order, and as a precaution, members of some various clone forces stationed on the planet would spread into the city as a police force. Accompanying the Coruscant Guard, now under Thorn's control, would be Windu, Plo, and Yoda. They were simply going to search for the Sith Lord. Similar to the attack on Kamino, it would go without a blaster shot fired. The Senate commandos tried to protect the senators, but the clones showed credentials from Kamino proving that, as was approved by the Senate, the clones were permitted to follow through with Executive Order 30 without repercussions and without challenge. All who stood in their way would be branded as traitors to the Republic and face punishments equatable to treason. The Senate commandos and personal protection services for various senators and corporate demagogues would step aside, allowing the clones to fulfill their orders. Fox and Thorn did have their own little beef, but it never bubbled over or went anywhere. Thorn had orders to follow, and if Fox didn't get in line, he'd be treated as a mutineer, which worked pretty well in silencing their little argument. As the Jedi quietly aided the Coruscant Guard in taking command over the Senate with an even larger task force of Jedi, the light corvette carrying Anakin dropped out of hyperspace. he saw this as an opportunity to jump ship, to warn somebody, hopefully save the Senate. This vessel was operating as an undercover transport, so communications going out were shut down. It was entirely meant to stop Skywalker from doing anything to jeopardize the Jedi plan. Well, he jumped the ship instead, using an escape pod and luckily landing in the middle of a crime ring. Oh, maybe that wasn't so lucky. The Republic obviously went in after him, but their smaller and lighter vessel was scared off by a number of fighters that were in possession of the mob boss. When Anakin opened the door to his escape pod, he rolled his eyes as he looked at a horned man, pulling off his saber staff and igniting it. Skywalker raised his own weapon and told Maul that they could do this any other day. He had more important things to do, and Maul didn't really appreciate being disregarded like that, as they swung in at each other. Their blades collided, and Skywalker backed away from his opponent. This duel predated any visions Maul had of Anakin becoming Sidious's apprentice, so he was just fighting Skywalker for the love of the game. Their weapons clapped against each other, and their aggressive dueling styles didn't slow their pursuit towards victory, until Anakin rolled away from Maul and threw him backwards with the Force. Maul grabbed the edge of the escape pod to stop himself from falling, as he asked why Skywalker was here to begin with, or better question, why was he using an escape pod to get away from a perfectly fine Republic cruiser? Anakin, still in a slightly annoyed mood, played this little game with Maul, because maybe it could at least get him something in return. A lot of the past 24 hours was elaborated on, and Maul just nodded his head in intrigue. Of course, he saw the cure. He needed to find those executive orders for himself and take control over the clone army. But Maul, no longer rash, or as rash as he used to be, had an idea. Sure, he and Anakin could duke it out, and Maul would probably win because of his confidence and years of experience over Skywalker, or he could of course elongate his new reign instead. After all, Maul did escape Sidious, Tyrannus, and Grievous, plus he wouldn't mind some lovely revenge. So maybe instead of fighting, they could work together. Maul didn't really care about the Clone Wars, but he did love the idea of taking both Sidious's and the Jedi's Grand Army. That was double the revenge. He could use the clones to find Kenobi and murder him, and honestly, so much more. Maul couldn't stop thinking about the possibilities, so he sheathed his saber and told Skywalker that he'd give him one chance to hear him out. Anakin held his weapon, but listened to the plan, eventually putting his own weapon on his belt and agreeing. Night fell on Coruscant. The Jedi had assumed control over the Republic, as every senator, representative, and member of Palpatine's cabinet found themselves restricted to their offices. This wasn't a total imprisonment, but the Jedi were working through senators at an exceptionally fast rate, trying to learn who commissioned the Grand Army with Dooku. Many people were left confused, but the Jedi Council was slowly closing in on Sidious. He knew he needed to act, but the Coruscant Guard restricted all communication from the executive and Senate buildings. Palpatine was stuck, and worst of all, he couldn't rely on Tyrannus or Grievous to bail him out. The Sith Lord started concocting his own plan, not an escape, but a way to turn this against the Jedi. He naturally assumed they had learned of something, but why hadn't they visited his offices yet? Well, the Jedi were actually waiting. The Council delegated its most gifted fighters to maintaining a close eye on Palpatine's office, just from the outside. It was a very boring job, but it needed to be done. They had suspected him to be a Sith in disguise or an ally of the Sith, but they also needed him to prove it so that they could actually protect themselves after they dealt with him. Like, if they killed him. Anakin and Maul, on the other hand, were sitting awkwardly next to each other inside a starship, heading towards Sereno. Members of Crimson Dawn were accompanying them, because they were going to hack into Dooku's computer terminal to extract the executive orders. Anakin was just helping Maul deal with the old Count, before he was supposed to be disposed of. Maybe not killed, but left to die, or something ridiculous like that. They landed on the planet in the early hours of the morning, when the sun was still hidden around the curve of the globe. Without attracting the attention of the fleet, the two new short-term allies exited and raced along the trees. When they reached the castle, determined to at least bring Dooku down, they cut through his defense droids. Skywalker knew he had to accept these terms, because Dooku was a target, and it was his quickest way back to Coruscant. If he didn't use this, Anakin would be stuck fighting Maul with Crimson Dawn around some backwater world, doing nothing to help anybody. Now he at least had a chance of getting word to Padme to stay home from work today, though with the amount of time he was in hyperspace, he realized he was probably too late. This was at least probably helping the cause, right? Their weapons lit the interior of the castle, but Dooku was waiting like a hunter on a catwalk above the hall. He heard the droids get cut down initially, and watched the two new individuals enter his home, before leaping in. Anakin, on a second to react, shoved Maul out of the way, and spun backwards. The two of them raised their weapons and moved in. Maul didn't even realize what Skywalker had done until his weapon collided against Dooku's. Even in his old age, Tyrannus moved like a demon. He spun between them, dashing his saber through the air and knocking them away. Maul was much more comfortable with his metallic legs at this point, and Skywalker was fighting with desperation. This was a duo Dooku never expected to face, but they were especially challenging together. Anakin batted his saber down, and Dooku struck away, firing electricity at Anakin, who blocked it. As Maul moved in, more sabers could be heard igniting. Grievous was orbiting the planet when Dooku activated his distress beacon before these two individuals entered his home. The droid general lunged in, stopping Maul from countering Dooku. The saber staff was not an ally as Maul fought back against Grievous's aggressive pursuit. The chambers ignited with various sabers and ranging skill levels. Skywalker was slightly outmatched without Maul in his corner, but as the fights continued raging on, the tech wizards of Crimson Dawn had slipped behind Dooku's desk to get a hold of the executive commands. Skywalker saw this out of the corner of his eye, and put together the puzzle in his head. Maybe it was foolish to side with Maul, but for now he needed his help. Dooku shoved Anakin backwards, but this played into Skywalker's favor as he defended himself. Their weapons screeched as Maul and Grievous's duel intensified. On Coruscant, Sidious could be seen utilizing the Force. The Jedi were watching him like a hawk, and he had gone to a corner of the room where they shouldn't have been able to see him. But the blue lightning was enough of a signal that he was up to no good. Sidious was crafting a Force storm of sorts to send a rippling explosion against the transformers around the building. It was meant to make the Jedi attack look like a staged execution against the Senate. But as he was preparing to ignite the actual detonation, Mace broke down the doors and charged in, with Plo, Depa, and Fisto right behind him. Their weapons slashed at the Sith Lord, and Sidious ripped two crimson blades from the vases and countered the Jedi opponents. Plo and Depa used a countering strike pattern of heavy and light, while Fisto's Form 1 forced Sidious to rely on defense, and Mace's Vapad left him without a full range of effective attacks. What made matters worse was the Frog Demon himself. Master Yoda was moving through the Senate building at blinding speed. The Jedi Masters cornered Sidious like a rabid animal, and he fought like a cornered beast. His sabers crushed through wall panels and missed Jedi strikes, but he avoided being hit. It was a continuous spin that never saw conclusion. Palpatine was shoved backwards by Plo, cut by Depa, and as he fired electricity at the two of them, Yoda lunged in between the lightning and blocking sabers as he speared Sidious in the chest. Hopefully, the blue electricity would be enough for the Senate to not totally get pissed off at the Jedi for killing him. But the Jedi had come up with a plan since Kamino to use this executive order, thanks to some ideas from Commander Thorn. Back on Sereno, Skywalker ducked away from Dooku and moved behind the desk. The Sith Lord cut through the Crimson Dawn hackers, leaving Maul without his executive orders. Anakin bashed Dooku to the side and forced the Count to roll over the desk, which Anakin cut in half. Maul, with blinding rage over losing his executive commands, lifted Grievous off the ground with the Force and crushed the droid's cybernetics as Dooku slashed at Skywalker, who leapt off the broken desk and slammed down. Maul killed Grievous and with his saber staff, turned around and shoved his weapon through Dooku's back. Anticipating that Anakin would act like any other Jedi, he prepared to con Skywalker and betray him. But Anakin lunged forward, attacking Maul. The Sith Zabrak defended himself, as their duel from before picked up right where it left off. Anakin ducked to strike and spun around, jabbing at Maul's saber. As they began trading blows, Skywalker picked up one of Grievous's weapons and ignited it across Maul's face. With his own saber, he cut Maul across the abdomen, finishing what Obi-Wan couldn't do years before. Maul was cut in half again. He just wouldn't somehow survive it this time. The Senate ordeal would be a mess for the Jedi, but it also wouldn't be too terrible, in all fairness. Thanks to the loyalty Commander Thorn had for his brothers, the Jedi were able to create an executive order to remove all inhibitor chips. which would be done with maximum efficiency, protecting troopers like Tup who would deal with terrible malfunctions in the future. Someone like Cut Lawquane would also have his chip removed, thanks to the courtesy of Captain Rex. The Grand Army of the Republic would remain indebted to the Jedi Order, while maintaining independence for each individual trooper. The shock troopers under Thorne's command would be the last to have their chips removed. The reason that took so long was due to the Jedi leadership forcing a peace treaty to end the war. With Skywalker managing to run through 2 Sith and a droid general in one go, the Jedi effectively brought the war to an end. The Separatists saw the writing on the wall with the beginning of the Outer Rim sieges, and it was in their favor to surrender now before the fighting got any worse. The Jedi brokered everything, despite some public backlash, and by some, I mean a lot. The problem is, the clones and Jedi were working together, and theoretically, the population would be completely under Separatist control without either force. Palpatine's death wouldn't really be announced. He'd be considered a removed asset from the Republic, because the Council figured that while they were in control, they could root out some instability to save the Republic. To the actual general public, and to Anakin, who eventually got over his little grounding, this could be interpreted as a power grab. But the Jedi were realistically trying to bring order back to the Republic itself. With the aid of lawmakers and several other senators that willingly cooperated, new laws, amendments, checks and balances, and so forth were added to the actual Republic. They also made sure that once they let go of their own power, harm would not be done to the clones, the former Separatists, or themselves. Notice how the Jedi consider themselves after taking care of those who needed the protection the most. The Order understood the political ramifications this action would have on them, but when they relinquished control, which many people never thought they would, a lot of the public outcry would stop. The Jedi obviously didn't do a perfect job, but they did a really good one, because they ensured that the Republic wouldn't slip back into the same old type of corruption that broke it initially. It was a fine line for the Order, but they walked it, and gave control back to the Senators and the Senate. Anakin would be applauded for his work, even though he did try to escape their temporary grounding. The Jedi and Anakin had to mutually agree that maybe they didn't communicate the best or deal with their intentions the best. However, they also agreed that it resulted in the best outcome for everyone, so they couldn't really be mad. Anyone, that is. The Sith were gone, the religion would be demolished by the Jedi in the following years. The Separatists would reintegrate into the Republic, and the Senate would return to power without corporate interference. In the years to come, Anakin's relationship with Padme would become public to the Jedi, and the Council would decide to let it persist. They focused more on how Anakin had done with it thus far, because he had brought balance to the Force with the relationship. The Order would see its own internal changes as a result. Plus, Anakin was on the Council, and he didn't do the same thing Master Eula Braylon did years before, so they could forgive him. The Senate by this point was operating like an actual government that had focused on humanitarian needs and uniting the galaxy, rather than tearing it apart. The clones were integrating into society as the last crusaders of the Outer Rim conflict returned home as heroes. Crimson Dawn and Maul's death at Anakin's hands were the perfect push for the Jedi and Republic to enter the Outer Rim. Once the crime families were defeated, Republic law would be instated, and true change could begin. Anakin's own life would be much happier, as he was able to live stress-free from the relationship of secrecy. Shaak Ti, as Master of the Order under Grandmaster Windu, would oversee much of the bills to protect the clones. She and the Grand Army forever would remain close, as the Kaminoans, those responsible for potentially destroying the galaxy, would be put in prison for the rest of their lives. The rest of the Kaminoans would return to Kamino to continue their business with direct Republic oversight. In the end, the Republic would be the government that the people needed, and the Jedi, with more funding and protection from the actual government, and aid from the Clone Army, returned to the public spotlight as an order that served all the people of the galaxy. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to all the patrons for supporting the channel. Smash that like button. Let's talk about how Shaak Ti rage baited Nala Se. So this story is kind of funny in a way. This story is kind of just, what if Shaak Ti rage baited Nala Se by accident into revealing the executive orders? I don't think Shaak Ti would be like looking around necessarily, and I just felt like it would be kind of redundant to use like the Tup incident or the Tyrannus Sipho incident from Season 6 or Obadiah. I really wanted to kind of create a unique situation here, and it happens before the top arc. It's somewhere between Ahsoka leaving and the top arc. It's between Season 5 and 6, basically. And I really wanted it to be a moment between Nala Se and Shaak Ti, like just a coincidental moment, and that's why everything starts kind of unfolding as like a butterfly effect, domino effect, if you will. It also is kind of why Anakin is more distrusting of the Council, more reactionary to them, because, as said in the video, it is after Ahsoka left the Order, so that wound is still pretty fresh for him. So he's acting on impulse, maybe not in the best ways, but he's saying, oh, you guys just betrayed Ahsoka, you might betray Padme, and that's not what I want. I also thought it would be really fun to have Maul and Anakin team up against Dooku. I don't really think that's something I've done before. I may have done it a while back, but it's not something I specifically really remember doing. But I thought it'd be fun to have them team up and have like a really cool A-B plot kind of thing going on here, where the Council's like, yo, just like chill, we're gonna deal with this. And then Anakin's like, hey, what if I didn't chill? Because I don't do that. And then obviously he and Maul go crazy. So I hope you all enjoyed the story. This is literally what if Shaak Ti rage baited Nala Se, the story. But I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.